I want to bring the choir up right now. And this piece we're going to be listening to invites us to slow down a little bit. We've been talking about a lot of different heavy things here. Get still, get out of your head, listen, live from the heart, live with love. This piece of love was composed by Dee Dee Dewson of Texas. And Dee Dee, a former church organist, has taught piano and music theory for years. She's excellent. This is a lovely piece. And this is of love. And might I suggest just to hold your applause after the piece so we can reflect on the music.
Sit down and rest. Life will wait for a few moments. There's still time to practice love for a little while. Time to let the fresh air of real peace into your life. Be still, be still, and learn again how to live. Raise your eyes and see beyond this narrow life. Learn to love. Learn to love. And
Well, Bruce is not on this journey alone. He's with his beloved wife, Evelyn Emerson, Ev Emerson. And it wasn't until many months after we started our series of conversations with Bruce that we introduced Ev to the audience. We talked about Bruce, we talked about the diagnosis, we talked about how the disease was progressing, we talked about his job. And then one person actually called the station and said, "Is he married or what?" He mentions this woman and you never hear from her. I mean, what gives? So I said to Ev, well, are you ready to maybe talk to folks around the region, around the world, really? So thank you, by the way, for being here.
You're welcome.
I want to start, if that's okay, by a little clip from our piece talking about caregiving. This is a clip from the series that focused on Ev, but also about caregiving.
You have to go up and down and accept that there are going to be days that are really hard and days that aren't.
That's Ev Emerson, the wife of Bruce Kramer. She and Bruce, like most families dealing with ALS, find themselves at times riding an emotional roller coaster.
I have my days I call my leaky days, where it seems like all day long my eyes leak.
I gotta ask, what brings on the leaky days?
Oh, sometimes ridiculous things, sometimes just the smallest thing. I talk about being ambushed by opening a photo album and seeing Bruce in a triathlon, for example. And then it just brings on lots of sad feelings. Something as small as that will start a leaky day. But they don't last long, so that's good.
Dealing with ALS, you do a lot of processing of emotions, I'm sure, with any disease, especially as a caregiver. How does it work for you?
I tried writing. Bruce enjoys writing to get his feelings out, and I can't seem to do that, so I'm more of the talk therapy kind of person. So immediately I contacted a grief counselor, and that has been very helpful to me to talk with somebody else in a safe place about my feelings, and that's how I deal with it.
The healing power of music has also been helpful. Ev Emerson is a classically trained pianist. A love of music is something both she and Bruce Kramer share. Something else the two share is a strong, independent streak, and ALS is teaching them to ask for help when needed.
Oh, that is really hard. It is so hard when you're a doer for other people. A teacher is what I am. That's really hard to take help. But honestly, we couldn't have made the moves that we've made without lots of help, and I'm so appreciative of that.
I've written about this. It's probably the hardest thing I've had to learn, is to ask for help. It's a hard thing to do, especially when I have always been the guy that took care of this family, and that isn't me anymore.
Well, I know it's really hard for Bruce to ask me for help, but I laugh and say, well, you cooked dinner for me for at least 30 years, so I figure I've got at least 30 years of giving back to do before we're even on an even plane. So I don't think about it as a burden. It's just what you do for somebody you care about.
None of what you two are going through is easy, obviously. Would you say, though, Ev, that the first 6 weeks was probably the hardest to date?
Absolutely. It was just really difficult. In the stroke of one sentence, you have ALS. I saw my future just change. And first it was the loss of the dreams of growing old together and of playing with grandkids. And then the fears of, well, what happens with all this? Will I have to stop my job? Will I have to sell the house? Will we become destitute? You hear all these terrible things about horrible medical bills. So I was just one terrible quivering mass of anxiety and grief, and I immediately got sick and didn't get out of bed for about 2 weeks. It was really tough.
Was it also difficult because, you go on the internet right away and there's so much information out there. Some of it is not very good information, and some of it is pretty dire right off the bat. And again, as I say this, none of this is good, but how did that wash over you? How did you deal with that?
Well, it wasn't very helpful. Like Bruce, as soon as the diagnosis came, I wanted information. So I immediately looked up ALS, and I closed my computer in about 60 seconds. It was just long enough to see that 6 months to 2 years was what they give a person with ALS. And then I read something about difficulty in breathing. And because I didn't really know anything else about the disease, and because I didn't really want to read anymore, I think for the first month I really didn't sleep because I kept thinking about this breathing issue. And I just lay in terror every night for about a month, thinking, I gotta listen, because what if he stops? And it wasn't until we went to our first clinic, our ALS clinic, that one of the neurologists very gently and patiently explained to me the progression of the disease and that I didn't have to worry about the breathing right away. So, I can sleep. I'm so glad.
And we should say that you come down, both of you, to Mayo Clinic.
Right.
Yes.
And that's the clinic we're talking about here. As a person, and I've admitted to y'all that my family is dealing with dis-ease and my father's dementia, we find that it's extremely hard because of shifting sand. It's like you feel you're on shifting sand. Right when you think you've got something taken down and nailed down, everything is fine, something else happens. Are you finding that with ALS?
That's really true. We feel kind of proud of ourselves. We figure one thing out and we can do this and this is working, and then something else goes south and we have to learn a whole new way of dealing with just everyday kinds of activities. So it doesn't stay the same. And it's an emotional thing too. I think my so-called leaky days probably correspond with when something has changed. And then, luckily it lasts for a little bit, but then we get our bearings again and pick ourselves back up and say, yes, we can do this, and we do it again.
Speaking of change, and Bruce, feel free to chime in here, how have the dynamics of your relationship changed?
Well, Bruce is a leader, and I've been very happy being a follower, very happy in that role. And Bruce has been the cook, the meal planner. He's traveled, done all the travel arrangements. He handles our social calendar, and I'm very happy just doing what he tells me to do.
Wait a minute. Stop. That is so untrue.
Well, but
I was a good cook.
you were good. But I've had to come out of myself, and I've had to take on things that I'm not really very comfortable with. I'm pretty much an introvert. I think you'll be able to say that that's true, and to have to do things like even driving. I don't like to drive. I like to sit in the passenger seat.
I know
But
that.
I'm the driver now, and I do some of the meal planning, and well, I do a lot of the meal planning, and I do all of the cooking, and that changes things.
Yeah, I think I think there are other pieces that are more subtle here, and I know that right after diagnosis, I journaled a lot about my fears about what was going to happen. Would I become something that you wouldn't love as a husband anymore because I couldn't be equal, quote unquote, in the partnership? And I think that's a really normal fear to have. And I know that you probably have talked with different people about the shifting sands of just what does it mean to be husband and wife. And yet, I find that what we have done is we have, where intimacy before might have come in one way, it now comes in other ways. And we find ourselves finding new spaces for time to just share the day, for you to unload about what happens to kindergartners about halfway through the year. You know, the funny part of all of this is that I do remember this line in my journal. I thought, you know, when push comes to shove, if I've lost everything, if I've lost my ability to speak, I can still listen. I can still be your ear. And so you've allowed me to have confidence in that. Mm-hmm. And we have shared very raw stuff with each other in this process. So it's changed, but I still feel like we're a good team.
Yeah. Oh, you're a great team. I really believe this. And so you're saying that ALS, any disease, should not take away the ability to love fully, or at least love differently.
We have learned in this process we have met people who are handling this really well, and they have allowed their own dis-ease to bring them more closely together in a new way. And we have also learned that there are many people who just can't talk about it. And by not talking, by not communicating, you leave all of that stuff out in the room. It's there. Mm-hmm. Believe me, it's there. And but it's unacknowledged, and you're not quite sure what it means. You don't have a chance to really work through a collective sense of what it is. And so I am saying that you can have love, and you can have joy, and you can have those things that brought you together in the very beginning. At least that's how we've experienced it, I think.
Mm-hmm. I will say another personal note here that my mom is a nurse, and so she initially found my father to be a set of symptoms. I know this sounds odd to say, but you know, treating it, the guy was a set of symptoms to treat. And I say that because it's sometimes easy to do that. Have you been able to see Bruce? Obviously you have, but talk a bit about it. See him as the person he is, beyond the symptoms.
I think that's really very real, and I think we both think it's very important that you are not a set of symptoms, and we are blessed to have caregivers who can take care of some of those care issues so that I can still be your companion and your confidant and your lover, and not have to feel like that's all our relationship is care. And I don't think all people are that lucky. Some people, that is their life, is just the caregiving all the time, and it's difficult.
And I actually would turn that back on its ear, because again, just like in the tell, where it became really obvious that one does not tell someone, I have ALS, and then expect it to be all about you. This whole thing about caregiving is probably more important than the person who has the actual symptoms. Caring for the caregiver, I nag you to go to yoga. I try to help you to get down to the workout room. Get out on your bike, Ev. Take care of yourself. Go out for coffee. These are things that if you don't do them, there is a grimness that comes into our lives, because it's all focused on the symptoms of ALS. So it goes both ways. And I think in your case, Cathy, with dementia, it would be harder, because at least technically I'm still operating on 6 cylinders. But it's probably harder for your dad to acknowledge what this is doing to your mom, or what it's doing to you.
True.
But I can. And again, if one of the great gifts of ALS has been to figure out that caregiving is about caring for caregivers, and not as much about what kind of care do you get. So I think that's part of it.
There was a person, I can't remember who it was, but right after Bruce got diagnosed, who said to me, now, Ev, a piece of advice. You have to know that Bruce is going to get all the care he needs, and people aren't going to look at you. And so I'm going to tell you right now, you have to take care of yourself, because you will get lost in the shuffle. And I took that to heart.
Good advice.
Yeah, it's good advice.